There are whole regions of this planet that still sit beyond what maps can promise. Forest canopies seal off entire worlds, and river systems cut through territories that have never been fully traced. Expeditions return with gaps in their notes because the landscape swallows details faster than anyone can record it. Every so often, someone brings back a story that bewilders and fascinates. Someone might hear an unfamiliar animal or see a structure half claimed by roots that shouldn't exist. Maybe they find something as simple as an undocumented path. Perhaps the world isn't finished revealing itself. Researchers talk about species that surface and then vanish again. Archaeologists argue over stone buildings and temples. Even satellite images raise questions when shadows form shapes that don't line up with natural formations. The more technology advances, the more it exposes pockets of the world that we don't understand. These are the ideals that Percy Fawcett thrived in, exploring the unknown and following clues that he believed led to a civilization that long slipped out of reach, a world shrouded in mystery, and in that search, Percy Fawcett became a mystery himself. Welcome to Down the Crooked Path. I'm your host, Amanda Joy. Join me as we dive into eerie and spine-chilling stories that blur the lines between reality and the unknown, from cryptids and mysterious disappearances to true crime, UFO sightings, and paranormal activity. Venture into the unknown and uncover the secrets that lie down the crooked path. Modern society owes a great deal of thanks to the societies that came before us. Mesopotamian astronomers tracked the movements of the sun, the moon, and the planets with enough precision to create the earliest versions of the zodiac. The Indus Valley left standardized weights and measurements that show a consistent system used across multiple settlements. Their urban layouts included drainage networks and grid patterns that demonstrate a level of planning still recognizable in modern city designs. The ancient Egyptians created one of the earliest known 12-month calendars. Their year was divided into 3 seasons, each containing 4 months. Each month had 30 days, organized to be 3 10-day weeks called decans. There have been clay tablets discovered that show calculations that resemble the foundations of modern mathematics. And without modern tools and technology, it's sometimes hard for us to fathom that these less developed civilizations could do all these things. Some writers and French theorists have argued that the scale and precision of the pyramids at Giza could not have been created without advanced technology, and they believe that the ancient Egyptians were guided to create these by extraterrestrial visitors. There are even ideas that there exist some undiscovered civilizations that are far more advanced than the ones that we have currently found. One of the most popular is the lost city of Atlantis. Plato introduced Atlantis in 2 dialogues written around 360 BCE. Timaeus and Critias. He presented it as a story passed down through several generations before reaching him. In the dialogue, a character named Critias recounts his accounts with an ancestor, Solon, and what this ancestor supposedly learned during a visit to Egypt. Priests there described an island power that existed far beyond the Strait of Gibraltar. They said that it could control other islands and parts of the surrounding continents. Plato described Atlantis as a large island with a capital built in circular sections of land and water. Canals connected each ring. The center held a temple dedicated to Poseidon. The land was described as rich in resources with forests, metals, and fertile plains. Society was organized under 10 rulers who governed different regions while following shared laws that were engraved on a pillar inside this temple. According to the story, Atlantis expanded its influence until it attempted to move against the Mediterranean. Athens resisted and won. After that conflict, Atlantis was said to have been destroyed by a sudden natural event that caused the island to sink into the sea. Plato used that account as part of a larger conversation about power, governance, and the rise and fall of societies. But Atlantis isn't the only theorized lost advanced society. El Dorado began as a story recorded by Spanish colonists in the 1500s. They had heard accounts from the Motoixca people of what is now Colombia. During the coronation of a new ruler, the leader covered his body in gold dust and traveled into Lake Guatavita, where the gold objects were placed into the water as offering. Early Europeans focused on the gold involved in this ceremony and turned to the title El Dorado, the Golden One, into the idea of a city filled with treasure. As the story spread, explorers searched for this place across South America. Expeditions pushed into the jungle, convinced that a wealthy kingdom waited somewhere beyond the map's regions. None of these searches found a city, but the legend continued to grow as travelers brought back descriptions of lakes, plateaus, and settlements that they believed might be connected. And it's in South America, in the Amazon forest, that explorer Percy Fawcett believed there was another lost ancient civilization. Percy Harrison Fawcett was born in 1867 in Torquay, England, to a family with long ties to the Royal Geographical Society. His father had been a fellow of the society, and his brother wrote adventure novels and philosophical works. Fawcett grew up in an environment where exploration, geography, and intellectual pursuits were a part of his everyday life. He attended Newton Abbot Proprietary College and later the Royal Military Academy at Woolwich, where he trained as an artillery officer. After receiving his commission, he served in several locations across the British Empire, including Hong Kong and Malta. His assignments exposed him to unfamiliar terrain, military surveying, and logistic challenges that later shaped his approach to fieldwork. In 1901, he joined the Royal Geographical Society himself to study surveying and map-making. This training led to work for the British Secret Service in North Africa and for the War Offices in Ireland. By the time he reached his mid-30s, he had built a reputation as a disciplined officer, with strong technical skills and a growing interest in remote regions. His first major South American assignment came in 1906, when he was sent to map the borders between Brazil and Bolivia and settle a border dispute. This mission was dangerous. He set off in a blizzard in a mule train through the Andes, a route so dangerous it's called the Railroad of Death. But this trip established him as a reliable cartographer, and he spent many years moving through the territory that caused him to rely on the locals. Percy is very charismatic, and the Amazon tribes take to him quickly. His colleagues think of these people as inferior beings and want to kill their way through the tribes, but Percy doesn't let them. These were communities that had little to no contact with outsiders. With some of the local tribes, these people were wary, but open to interactions. Others, though, they defended their territories. With these tribes, Percy would offer them gifts to show that he wasn't there to take from them, or he just took a different route and avoided those areas altogether. It's because of these interactions he had with these indigenous groups that Percy believed large populations could survive in these jungles that were known to be dangerous and less hospitable. He saw how they hunted, how they managed resources and built settlements. But Percy didn't see these people as smart enough to understand or learn these things on their own. He still considered these tribes to be kind of backwards, so he believed that they must have been taught these things by someone else. The Amazon rainforest spans about 6 million square kilometers. Its size, density, and lack of infrastructure makes it extremely difficult to fully explore. To this date, it's believed that at least 25% of the rainforest has been unexplored, and this is especially true during the 1920s. So with the combined belief that people could survive in the jungle, and that the people currently living there weren't smart enough to have learned everything they knew on their own, Percy came to the conclusion that there must be another society existing somewhere in the jungle, one far more complex, and one that hadn't been discovered yet. For a long time, most scientists believed the Amazon couldn't support large or complex societies. The rainforest is dense and full of life, but the soil beneath it is thin and loses nutrients quickly. Researchers have argued that farming on that kind of ground couldn't sustain a big population. They believe any group living there would need to stay small and move often to avoid exhausting the land and to stay safe from predators. One day, Percy comes across this document in the National Library of Brazil called Manuscript 512. It's a 10-page document dating back to around the 1750s, and it was discovered in 1839. In it, the manuscript describes a lost stone city that's deep inside the Amazon rainforest. It's an account of Portuguese banderites who spent years searching for silver mines, and during their search, they find these remains of a large stone settlement. Apparently, this society had wide paved streets and multi-story buildings with arches, reliefs, and statues. The architecture was said to be similar to ancient Greece or Rome. Now, we don't know where this manuscript came from, and its accuracy has been widely debated among historians. But for Percy, this was proof about his theories on the Amazon forest and the people who lived there. What's more is there are tons of missionaries that claim some of the locals talk about a lost city somewhere in the forest. And along his searches of these areas, he's uncovered some artifacts, like bits of pottery that he thinks could lead to a bigger discovery. And he believes that this city belongs to an ancient civilization which he calls Zed, and refers to the city as the Lost City of Zed. And he's not the first explorer to believe that there's a lost city somewhere in these jungles. For centuries before him, explorers have been chasing their own versions of a hidden city somewhere deep in the jungle. When the Spanish reached the northern South America in the 1500s, they had heard stories about a leader who had covered himself in gold dust during a ritual. The story spread fast, and it didn't take long before it turned into claims about a city filled with gold. Expeditions pushed into the Andes and the lowlands looking for it. Some men died from disease, others disappeared into the jungle, but none of them found a city. Yet those stories kept circulating. By the time Percy began his work, early explorers had already left behind journals, maps, and reports describing settlements that they believed existed somewhere beyond the areas that they had currently reached. Those accounts varied in detail, but they all pointed to the same idea. Something was out there, and no one had been able to reach it. After years of surveying the Amazon for the Royal Geographical Society, Percy has earned enough trust with them that when he asks to return in 1920 to search for a city he believes is out there, they don't hesitate. Now, Percy doesn't think that there's a city made out of gold there, but he does think that there is something out there.
Maple syrup and being polite. I'm Valerie, host of Canadian Creepies, the podcast that digs up stories polite history would rather forget. Cold cases that never found justice, haunted places that refuse to stay quiet, and folklore with a dark side you've probably never heard. If true crime, paranormal mysteries, and unsettling Canadian history are your thing, you'll want to tune in. New episodes every week wherever you get your podcasts. Canadian Creepies, exploring and exposing the shadows of the true north.
The expedition is approved, and Brazil officials supported it as well. And whatever wasn't covered financially, Percy helped cover the costs for. He kept the team small, men that he had worked with before, and also men who understood what it meant to follow him into the jungle and the dangers that came with it. Now, all throughout his studies in search of clues for this lost city, Percy has become increasingly guarded about his research. He's worried that if he shares too much, someone else would reach the site first. When he traveled through towns, he avoided giving details about where he was headed or what he expected to find. Even some of the men on his own team only knew the broad outline of the route. Percy believed that keeping the information to himself was the only way to protect the work that he had spent years building. So in reality, we don't really know where he was headed. What these men are expecting, though, is to go through some pretty tough terrain. There are piranha-infested waters, pythons, and other wild predators, patches of quicksand. But when they reached the Mato Grosso region, the start of the trip felt pretty manageable. The river was calm, the weather was steady, and the men were all in good spirits, but that didn't last for long. The rains moved in and they didn't stop. It turned the ground into a thick, sucking mud that swallowed their boots. Insects were everywhere, mosquitoes, ants, botflies, biting through clothing that was already starting to rot from the constant damp. The heat was so intense that a few of the men started seeing things that weren't there. Their supplies weren't holding up either. Food spoiled faster than they planned for. Water was everywhere, but not all of it was safe to drink without boiling, and they couldn't keep fires going long enough to make it reliable. Dehydration set in. One of the men even develops a fever that doesn't break no matter what they try. But Percy doesn't slow down. If anything, the conditions have made him more determined. He believed they were close enough that turning back now would mean everything they endured was for nothing. So he pushes them forward, and the men follow even though their bodies are giving out. Along the riverbank, they found some pottery fragments, a few shaped stones that looked like they could be tools, but nothing definitive, nothing that proved the lost city existed. But enough for Percy to convince himself that they were on the right path. The rest of the team didn't see it that way. They were sick, exhausted, and running out of supplies. Morale collapsed. Even their guides, the people who knew the forest better than anyone, told them it was time to turn back. Whatever lay ahead wasn't worth the risk. They had barely made any progress, but a disappointed Percy and his tired and sick team turned back. The Royal Geographical Society was also disappointed. Percy didn't return with the groundbreaking discoveries he had promised. Nothing he came back with was worthy of publish. Most explorers would have stopped there, but not Percy. He convinced himself that the only reason they hadn't reached the city was because the team had been too weak and the supplies too limited. He goes home to reconvene. Over the next few years, he works on securing funding for another expedition. This time, though, he wants more control. A smaller team would mean fewer people to slow him down. In April of 1925, at the age of 57, Percy sets out again. This time he brings along his son Jack and Jack's best friend, Riley Remmel. Jack was 21, smart, athletic, loyal to a fault. He had joined his father in the 1920 expedition into the Amazon jungle, and he believed in the search just as much as Percy did. Now, Riley didn't have any experience in the jungle, but Percy thought the two men would keep each other steady. Jack has also had a prophetic dream of all of them walking into this beautiful, ancient temple, and Percy is one who believes in prophecies. The officials in Brazil warn Percy that the route he has planned cuts through territory controlled by indigenous groups who don't welcome outsiders. But Percy doesn't agree with this. He thought he knew the tribes well enough there that he understood how to approach them safely. Percy also knows, however, that he can't go into the jungle with just the three men, so they hire a group of local guides to help. And that works fine at first, but Percy is so excited and so eager that he keeps outpacing the guides. One night, fueled by determination, Percy moves ahead of the rest of the group. He's so far ahead that the team loses track of him. They decide to set up camp for the night, hoping that Percy will return by nightfall, but he doesn't. Instead, in the morning, Percy and his horse finally return to the group, claiming that he was just so excited that he didn't notice how far ahead he had gotten, and he just ended up sleeping on the ground next to his horse. It's clear that he is so focused that he seems totally unaware of the danger around him. I mean, he slept out in the open with a tent where at any moment he could have been attacked by, say, a jaguar. They are starting to near some dangerous tribe territory, and Riley's foot has a wound that is starting to get infected. Even Jack is becoming irritable with everything, but Percy throws caution to the wind and he presses on. By late May of 1925, Percy, Jack, and Riley have been in the forest for weeks. The route has taken them deeper into the Mato Grosso than any of Percy's other earlier expeditions. Eventually, they reach a place Percy has called Dead Horse Camp. It's just outside of an area called the River of Death, and they're planning to enter that area. From here, Percy writes his wife Nina and tells her that they will reach a waterfall in about a week. His message is calm and confident. He even tells her that you need have no fear of failure. It's also here where Percy and the two men decide to part ways with their guide. After this letter, the group goes quiet. Weeks pass, then months with no new messages and no sightings reported. And at first, no one panics. Percy has a history of going dark for months and doesn't usually send updates unless necessary. But by the end of 1925, most people have started to grow worried. Soon the Brazilian officials organize small patrols to retrace the path towards Dead Horse Camp, and they find no signs of movement beyond that point. So they speak with some of the local communities. When questioned, the indigenous groups reported that 3 outsiders, with descriptions matching Percy, Jack, and Riley, had been seen passing through the territory near the Kalapalo. 3 white men, traveling lightly, were entering deeper into territory controlled by other groups, but that they hadn't been seen returning. The concern was that this group was fiercely protective of their land, and outsiders who entered the territory never returned. There were other reports claiming that a group of outsiders had been killed in the region around Xingu. The problem was that often these accounts were coming from secondhand sources and were being filtered through translators. So the details of what happened and how they were killed kept changing. Sometimes it was said that they were beheaded, and other times it was said that they had been shot. In 1927, an American explorer, George Dyatt, launches the first major search expedition. George is extremely experienced and fearless. He even test piloted one of the first ever airplanes, but even he comes across the same dead ends. Soon the situation has drawn enough attention that larger searches begin forming. Explorers, journalists, and adventurers volunteer to go into the jungle interior. Some were funded by newspapers, hoping for exclusive stories. Others paid their own way. As more groups entered the forest, the danger became obvious. Several of the early search parties ran into outbreaks of malaria before they even reached Xingu. Men collapsed on the trail. The teams had to turn back carrying whatever they could. Others pushed on and lost people to infection that spread through small cuts and insect bites. Supplies spoiled faster than expected, and some groups were forced to abandon their searches when food ran out. There were even a few expeditions that disappeared entirely. One team led by a journalist never returned, and no trace of their camp was ever found. Another group attempted to reach the same region, but from a different direction, and they were attacked before they made it to the river. Survivors reported that several members were killed and the rest barely escaped. Over the years, the number of deaths has climbed. Each new expedition added more names to the list. By the time the searches slowed down, more than 100 people had died trying to find out what happened to Percy Fawcett and the 2 young men who had followed him into the jungle. One of the earliest groups brought back a set of bones that they believed belonged to a European man, but the bones were examined and the measurements didn't match Percy's. More remains surfaced as the decades went on. Some were found at old campsites, others were uncovered after a storm washed away sections of the riverbank. Every time the bones were tested and compared to what had been known about Percy, Jack, and Riley. Some turned out to be indigenous members, some belonged to earlier travelers, and a few were too damaged to identify, but none connected to the missing expedition. Nina, Percy's wife, never believed that he was dead. She held on to the last letter Percy sent from Dead Horse Camp, and she read it over and over, convinced it meant he was still alive somewhere in the jungle. She believed that he had found something, or was living somewhere deep in the jungle that he couldn't return. And because she believed he was still alive, she followed every lead, no matter how unconventional. She also fought the Royal Geographical Society when they started to talk about launching search parties, fearing that they would interrupt with whatever discovery he was on the brink of finding. After years without answers, Nina begins meeting with psychics who claim that they could reach Percy. One medium told her that she became aware of a presence in the room and saw Percy standing near a window. She asked him whether he was still alive or dead, and she said that he laughed before answering. According to her, he said, "Can't you see that I'm alive?" and then added, "Give my love to Nina and tell her that we're all right." Another psychic described a different encounter. This one said that a young man appeared in front of her with a long beard and introduced himself as Jack. She claimed he told her, "We shall see you soon someday," before disappearing. She also said that the figure left behind a scent that she couldn't identify. Nina continued seeking out these sessions for decades. She wrote to Alfred Vaught Peters, a well-known clairvoyant, asking for a psychometric reading. She wanted information about her family, any contact with the expedition, and guidance for her daughter. She kept up with this correspondence and continued requesting readings for more than 20 years. In one reading, he told her that he sensed Percy in a place that felt remote and heavily wooded. He said Percy appeared calm and focused, as if he were still working. Peters described him as being surrounded by people who were unfamiliar to him, and he said that Percy was not alone and that the group around him seemed protective. Peters also said that he believed Jack was with him. He described Jack as older than the last photographs Nina had sent him, with a beard and a more serious expression. He said Jack appeared healthy and that the two were together. In another message, Peters said that he sensed movement, as if the group had traveled further into the jungle. He described a river, a clearing, and structures that he couldn't identify. He said Percy seemed determined and that he didn't sense fear from him. He never once described Percy as injured or deceased. And maybe it was wishful thinking, but for Nina, this meant that the men were alive and that they had, in fact, found the lost city of Zed and decided to stay. Over the years, there have been a ton of theories about what happened to Percy Fawcett. But the most popular of those theories is that he was likely killed by a territorial tribe. The Suya is notorious for defending its territory aggressively. Earlier expeditions said that outsiders who crossed into their land without permission were often killed. The Zavant were known for resisting contact with outsiders during the early 1900s. Several Brazilian patrols reported violent encounters when they attempted to move through the Zayant territory. Despite having been warned about these tribes by the Brazilian officials and other indigenous groups, Percy believed that, because of his past interactions, he would be safe. And these tribes in the Calo Polo area had territory that intersected with Dead Horse Camp. When George Diet sent out in 1927, he was determined to retrace Percy's route as closely as he could. He followed the same rivers, stopped on the same settlements, and spoke with the same communities that Percy had passed through 2 years earlier. As he moved deeper into the jungle, he began hearing consistent accounts from tribes along the Xingu. They told him that 3 outsiders had come through the region, and the descriptions did match Jack, Percy, and Riley. Eventually, George enters the Kalapolo village, and the Kalapolo tell him that the 3 men had stayed with them briefly before continuing east. They said that the expedition ignored warnings about the dangers ahead. According to the Kalapolo, the men walked towards an area where several groups were known to attack outsiders. Like Percy, George is also warned of these tribes, and, like Percy, he ignored these warnings, which would turn out to be a mistake. As he and his men ventured further into the hostile territory, they were captured. They only survived because George promised the tribe to bring them gifts in the morning. That night, they snuck out of the village and fled home. When he returns, he tells the Royal Geographical Society that he is certain Percy had been killed by a tribe beyond the Kalapolo territory, and that his own encounter showed how quickly an expedition could disappear in the same place. Supposedly, he claimed to have met the chief of the Anushuka tribe, Aloki, and George believed that Aloki was most likely the person who killed Percy based on what he is told by the other tribes. But there are some who don't believe George died. He never found a campsite or belongings. He never uncovered any bodies or bones. Nothing to suggest that he had any proof beyond secondhand accounts he had heard in interviews. Not to mention, the Anushuka tribe is further away from where we believed Percy's route was. Later, in lectures and writings, George's retellings become more and more dramatic about the tribe's involvement, leading to a lot of people suspecting that he was lying to save face about his otherwise failed mission. In the 1950s, Orlando Villas-Boas was working with several indigenous communities in central Brazil. During one of his visits, members of the groups living near the Upper Xingu told him that 3 white men had entered their territories decades earlier. They said that these men ignored warnings and kept moving deeper into the forest. According to their account, a conflict broke out and the outsiders were killed. This group even produces a body that they say belongs to Percy, but there are some issues with the body. For one, Percy was 57 years old when he vanished, and these remains belonged to a man in his 20s or 30s. Percy was also tall, standing around 6 feet tall, and when measured, these bones were significantly shorter by almost 6 inches. The skull shape also didn't match. Anthropologists noted that the jawline and cranial proportions were off. And finally, the teeth didn't match Percy's military records. When the tribe is questioned about why they lied, they said they wanted to discourage other expeditions and keep people out of the jungle. Another theory leads into the idea of theosophy, a late 19th century spiritualist movement founded by Helena Blavatsky. In the early 1900s, groups connected to theosophy and other occult movements talked about something that they called White Lodge. They described it as a council of spiritually advanced beings who existed on a higher plane or in a hidden location. These figures were sometimes called ascended masters. Followers believed that they were perfected individuals who continued guiding humanity after their physical deaths. Helena said that her knowledge about these white lodges came from a group that she called the Masters of the Hidden Brotherhood, describing the White Lodge as a hierarchy of enlightened teachers who communicated through visions, psychic messages, and telepathic connections. Supporters of the idea say that the lodges operate out of sight, influencing world events and offering guidance to people that they believed were ready to receive it. They described the members as existing beyond ordinary human limitations, working together as a council rather than as individual spirits. Now, Percy is both a very smart guy, and he's also deeply influenced by theosophy, mysticism, and the idea that certain people could communicate with higher beings. He has read about these hidden masters who were believed to guide humanity from remote places, and he took those ideas seriously. He believed that there were spiritually advanced groups living far from the modern world, preserving knowledge that had survived from ancient civilizations. Some biographers say that when he talked about Zed, he wasn't describing a city in the usual sense. They argue that he saw it as a spiritual center, possibly connected to the same kind of enlightened council described in stories about the White Lodge. Across different occult traditions, the idea of a White Lodge shows up several times in similar ways. It's described as a hidden center where enlightened beings guard knowledge that's believed to come from civilizations long gone. These places are said to exist out of sight, protected from anyone who isn't prepared to understand what's kept there. There are some who even describe the White Lodge as a place of initiation. Only people who reach a certain level of spiritual development are able to find it. The belief is that the location isn't discovered through travel alone. It requires a kind of readiness that can't be forced, and it comes from the mind. These lodges are almost always in remote regions. Writers have pointed to the Himalayas, the Andes, the Amazon, the Gobi Desert, even the pyramids in Egypt, as places where these beings are said to live. Each location is described as isolated enough to keep the lodge hidden and difficult enough to reach that only a small number of people would ever even attempt it. Across these occult traditions, the White Lodge isn't described as any one physical place. It's more like a network of hidden sanctuaries, each one said to hold pieces of ancient knowledge. Different writers place them in different parts of the world, and none of them agree on a single location. Some said that there were lodges connected to Atlantis. Others connect them to Mu or Lemuria. There are also versions that link them to cultures believed to have existed before the global flood. In every version, the lodges are presented as separate outposts of the same idea, groups of advanced beings preserving knowledge that didn't survive anywhere else. So when Percy vanishes, some people believe that he didn't die. They believed that he reached not a ruined settlement or an abandoned site, but a hidden community, that he reached a White Lodge, a place that only lets in people that it chooses. In this theory, the reason no one has ever found a body or equipment or any trace of the camp is because he didn't leave it behind. He brought it with him into this White Lodge. And the group of tribesmen who protect their territory so fiercely, they do so because they understand what's hidden inside the territory and protect it. This theory spread. Other pseudoscience-related theories started popping up as well. What if the city was real but just hidden geographically, like it's out of sync with the rest of the world? And when Percy walked into the ruins, he was really walking into something like a portal or a time rift, something that only opens under the right conditions. But even with all of that, the White Lodge theory is just one version of what might have happened. As more people tried to retrace Percy's route, other explanations started to surface. Each one tried to answer the same question: how 3 men could walk into the jungle and never be seen again. We've talked about theories that put Percy in the hands of something supernatural. We've talked about the possibility that he was killed by a tribe after ignoring warnings. But there's also the chance that nothing dramatic happened at all. The expedition may have been taken out by the same dangers that had ended so many other journeys before and after theirs. The region they entered was one of the harshest environments on the continent. Once they left that last village, they were completely on their own. If their supplies ran low, there was no way to replace them. Running low and running out of food was a real possibility, and starvation could set in long before they realized how much trouble they were in. And dehydration was just as dangerous. There are rivers everywhere, but not all of them were safe to drink from, and getting sick from contaminated water could take someone down fast. The Amazon is also full of diseases that move quickly through small groups. A fever, an infection, or a parasite could hit one of them and slow the entire expedition. Even if one person became too sick to walk, the others would have to decide whether to stay with him or push forward. Either choice could have ended their expedition and taken their lives. And we already know that Riley had an injured foot, so this possibility seems high. Predators are another threat. Jaguars, caiman, and venomous snakes are common in the area they were traveling through. A single bite or attack could have been fatal, especially with no medical supplies or way to get help. Even without predators, the environment itself is dangerous. The heat, the humidity, the constant exposure could wear down even the most experienced explorers. If they got caught in a storm or lost their bearings, they could have been stranded with no shelter. There's also the theory that the expedition didn't end in violence or starvation at all. Some researchers think that Percy and his team may have made contact with a tribe deeper in the forest and just stayed with them. The idea comes from the fact that several groups in the region lived in complete isolation at the time, and some of them were known to take in outsiders under very specific circumstances. Supporters of this theory point out that Percy respected the indigenous communities more than most of the explorers of his era. He learned their languages, followed their customs, and believed that they held knowledge of the outside world had lost. If he approached a group with that mindset, it's possible that they didn't see him as a threat. And maybe they did take him in if they were injured or sick, like Riley was. So maybe the expedition didn't disappear because something went wrong. It disappeared because they found a place where they were allowed to stay. The lack of remains or equipment becomes a part of this explanation. If they were absorbed into a community that didn't interact with outsiders, nothing from their camp would have been left behind for search parties to find. The men would have simply stepped into a different way of life, and once they did, there was no reason for them to return. But this theory, it seems like the least likely theory of all. If the men had been taken in by a tribe, why wouldn't someone just say so? A lot of the tribes in the area were interviewed by tons of people who were looking for the team, including Brazilian officials who were known to the tribes. And Percy and Jack still had to worry about Nina and their family at home waiting for them. Surely they wouldn't have just left them without word or warning. In the end, every theory about what happened to Percy Fawcett runs into the same problem. None of them can be proven. The Amazon never gave up a body, a campsite, or a single confirmed piece of evidence from the expedition. Search parties came back with stories, rumors, and secondhand accounts, but nothing that closed the case. And as the years passed, the mystery only grew. Each new lead pointed to a different direction, and every explanation left something unanswered. Maybe the men did die in the forest. Maybe they were taken in by a tribe and lived out their lives far away from the world they left behind. Maybe they reached something they believed was waiting for them. The truth is that no one knows. Percy walked into the jungle with 2 men and a plan he believed in completely. And after that, the trail ends. And more than a century later, it hasn't opened back up. Thank you for walking down this crooked path with me today. Keep following the questions that pull you forward, and let your curiosity take you deeper into the unknown. I'm Amanda Joy, and I'll meet you on the next path that we take together.